When we think of ancient Rome, our minds often picture grand architectural marvels like the Colosseum, the engineering genius behind aqueducts, and the vast network of roads that connected an empire spanning 3 continents. Rome gave us the foundations of modern law, governance, and military strategy. Its legacy still shapes our world today, but beneath this shining surface of progress and civilization lies a far darker story. Ancient Rome saw practices that today would be considered horrific, including brutal gladiatorial combat, harsh punishments like crucifixion, and the widespread use of slavery. These practices, while commonplace in their time, stand in stark contrast to modern ethical standards. Today, we will explore some of the most horrific and absurd practices in ancient Rome, practices that reveal the darker side of this mighty empire. Crucifixion, infamous due to its association with Jesus Christ, was a widespread execution method used by the Romans to intimidate and control. Reserved for slaves, rebels, and notorious criminals, crucifixion was brutal and intentionally prolonged. The process began with scourging, a brutal whipping with leather thongs, tipped with bone or metal, tearing flesh and causing severe blood loss. Victims were nailed or bound to a wooden cross, left exposed to the elements until death from exhaustion, asphyxiation, or shock. Nails were typically driven through the wrists rather than the palms, as the hands could not support the body's weight. The feet were either nailed separately or together to the vertical stake. Roman guards ensured the victim was dead before removing the body, sometimes hastening death by breaking the legs or stabbing the heart. Crucifixion was not only a method of execution, but a public warning, a spectacle of terror meant to deter rebellion and crime. Decimation, another brutal Roman punishment, involved randomly selecting 1 in every 10 soldiers from a disgraced unit to be executed by their comrades. This was a rare and drastic punishment, used when discipline had collapsed and an example needed to be made. The entire disgraced cohort, sometimes hundreds of men, would be assembled. Each group of 10 soldiers was told to draw lots. The unlucky man who drew the short straw or whose name was selected at random would be sentenced to death. This horrific lottery aimed to punish collective cowardice or rebellion. In most accounts, they would beat him to death with clubs, stones, or sometimes with their bare hands. There was no appeal and no chance of reprieve. The horror didn't end with the executions. The remaining soldiers faced additional humiliation and hardship. They would be forced to sleep outside the fortified camp, often without food or proper shelter, and treated as outcasts within the army. Decimation is one of history's most chilling examples of collective punishment, a reminder that even the greatest empires ruled not just with laws, but sometimes with terror. Puina Kale, meaning penalty of the sack, was reserved for parricide, killing one's own parents or close relatives in ancient Rome. Parricide was considered among the gravest crimes in ancient Rome. To address this ultimate betrayal, the Romans devised one of the most unique and terrifying punishments. The condemned was sewn alive into a large sack, the culleus, along with a collection of animals, a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey. This grotesque bundle was then thrown into a river or the sea to drown. This punishment was symbolic, intended to isolate the offender from both the human and natural world, denying them a proper burial and condemning them to a fate worse than death. The inclusion of animals was thought to curse the murderer and reflect the unnaturalness of the crime. Puina Kale exemplifies how Roman law combined cruelty with ritualistic symbolism to punish what was seen as the ultimate betrayal of family and society. By enclosing the killer with wild animals and casting them into water, the Romans sought to erase the parricide's existence from both society and the earth. With the expansion of Christianity, the custom faded, but survived in symbolic legal codes for centuries after the fall of Rome. This was not simply an act of vengeance, but a warning, a demonstration that betrayal of family would meet with ultimate retribution. In ancient Rome, the arrival of a newborn did not guarantee their survival. For many families, especially those under economic pressure or social expectation, the fate of some infants was tragically sealed not by disease or natural causes, but by deliberate neglect or abandonment. Infanticide and exposure were common practices in ancient Rome. Families sometimes abandoned unwanted newborns, often girls, disabled infants, or those born into poverty, by leaving them exposed in public places. These infants were left to die from exposure to the elements or to be taken by strangers, sometimes for adoption or slavery. The practice was socially accepted and legally tolerated, reflecting harsh economic realities and patriarchal values. Exposure was a form of passive infanticide, allowing families to avoid the burden of raising unwanted children without direct killing. However, it also underscored the precariousness of life for the most vulnerable in Roman society. The ancient Romans were notorious for their sophisticated and often sinister use of poison and curses. Both methods became integral to Roman power struggles, social competition, and the pursuit of personal vengeance. Poisoning was a common method for eliminating rivals, particularly among Rome's elite. Notorious poisonings involved emperors such as Nero, who employed the infamous poisoner Locusta, Claudius, allegedly killed by poisoned mushrooms, and various aristocratic families vying for power. The Romans most frequently used plant-based toxins such as hemlock, aconite, henbane, mandrake, hellebore, and yew extract. Professional poisoners, like the infamous Locusta, even tested new mixtures on animals or slaves to guarantee a perfect, undetected kill. Gladiatorial combat wasn't born in Rome, but the Romans perfected it. The earliest contests date back to Etruscan funeral rites, where slaves were made to fight as offerings to the dead. But as Rome grew, so did the games, from private rituals to public spectacles of ever-increasing scale. The real men of the arena were rarely volunteers. Most were slaves, captured in war, born into bondage, or condemned criminals. Some, desperate for fame or fortune, actually volunteered, signing a deadly contract for a chance at glory. Gladiators came from every corner of Rome's vast empire. Gauls, Thracians, Africans, and even women sometimes fought in exhibitions. Despite their low status, successful gladiators were celebrities. They attracted fans, inspired betting, and sometimes even earned or bought their freedom. Game day was a citywide event. The Colosseum could hold more than 50,000 spectators, everyone from slaves to senators, even the emperor himself. For Romans, the games were more than entertainment. They were a demonstration of the power and order of a city that ruled the world. When it came to adultery, the ancient Romans had rules that were as confusing as they were cruel, especially if you were a woman. For Roman husbands, the world was a playground. They could have mistresses, sleep with prostitutes, and indulge, so long as they didn't lose themselves in debauchery. For wives, it was a minefield. A Roman woman caught cheating. It could mean public humiliation, divorce, or even death. The law required the husband to lock his wife and her lover in the room where they were found. Then he had to gather as many witnesses as possible, friends, neighbors, anyone he could find, to confirm what happened. Once he'd corralled his witnesses, he got 3 additional days to collect evidence. There was no forgiveness built into Roman law. The husband was obligated to divorce his wife. If he didn't, he could be charged with the crime of pimping her out. But things could get much, much darker. If the lover was a slave or prostitute, the husband could simply kill him on the spot. No trial or questions asked. If the lover was a Roman citizen, it got murkier. The husband had to turn to his wife's father, her own family. Fathers in Rome had the chilling legal right to kill their daughter's lover. Sometimes, they might even kill their own daughter, restoring the family's honor in one violent act. Ancient Rome's adultery laws reveal just how far society has come and how much some issues endure. Frustuarium was primarily used within the Roman military to enforce discipline. This involved execution by beating and stoning, typically for soldiers guilty of desertion, cowardice, or mutiny. The condemned soldier was stripped and beaten with sticks or rods by his fellow soldiers until death. This collective punishment was meant to reinforce strict military order and instill fear among the ranks. Sometimes after the beating, the victim was stoned to death to ensure the sentence was carried out. Fustuarium was a grim reminder that loyalty and courage were non-negotiable in the Roman army, and failure could mean a gruesome public death at the hands of comrades. It was rare, but devastatingly effective. It harnessed collective responsibility, binding soldiers together in brutal complicity, ensuring unwavering obedience through fear. While today we view these acts with horror, understanding them helps us grasp the complexities of Roman law, culture, and power. They remind us how far human rights have come and how history's darkest chapters continue to shape our world. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration insightful, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Until next time, stay curious.